everyone, this is Island Nurse and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now this video is part 2 of the video entitled Brain A&P for Nurses. If you recall, in our last video we looked at a cross section of the brain and we were able to discuss some of the functions of major portions of the brain. In this video we're focusing primarily on the cerebrum, which is the largest area of the brain. So let's get started. As usual, we have a diagram here, and this diagram is a lateral view, meaning if I were to stand like this and look straight ahead, just imagine you were seeing a side view of my brain. And of course, we are going to go ahead and label the lobes of the cerebrum. So the area in blue is known as the frontal lobe. In green, we have the temporal lobe, the area at the back, which would be at the back of the head. In purple is the occipital lobe, and this area in pink is called the parietal lobe. And of course, the lobes all come in pairs. So there's a left frontal lobe and a right frontal lobe. Left parietal, right parietal. Left occipital, right occipital. Left temporal and right temporal. And something that's very interesting is that the left side of the brain controls motor actions on the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls motor actions on the left side of the body. Now, why is this so? This is because the motor neurons that run from the brain to the back of the neck to the brainstem crisscross when they get to the brainstem. So that's the reason why the motor neurons on the left side control actions on the right, and the motor neurons on the right side control actions on the left. So that's quite interesting. Alright, so let's go ahead and speak about the functions of the different lobes of the brain. So the first area in blue, like I said before, is the frontal lobe, and I have the functions in blue also, just to make it easier for you to remember. So this area would be like at the back of the forehead, underneath the skull bones. Alright, so the first function of this lobe is for speech, and the area responsible for that is called Broca's area. So this area plays a key role in us understanding spoken language, and also plays a role in us communicating our thoughts into words. Secondly, the frontal lobe plays a key role in motor skills such as walking or running. Also, this lobe is responsible for classification, and by that I mean this lobe helps us to be able to group items together and also to be able to distinguish among different items. So for instance, I can look at a group of animals and say, these are animals, so I'm able to identify that these are animals, and I'm able to further distinguish them by saying this one is a dog, or this is a cat, or this is a pig. So we're able to identify groups of items but also distinguish among the items. Also, the frontal lobe is responsible for memory, primarily short-term memory. So for instance, when you're reading, the frontal lobe helps you to remember the previous sentence that you read. So if you're reading a paragraph, you read one sentence, this lobe is responsible for helping you to remember that sentence as you continue to read. Also, the frontal lobe is responsible for impulse control. So it is essential in helping us control our anger and aggression. And what is interesting is that psychologists have found that people who are violent criminals, like let's say serial killers or rapists, for instance, what psychologists have found is that their frontal lobes differ significantly from the frontal lobes of other normal human beings. So that's something interesting to note. Okay, the frontal lobe also is responsible for us developing our personality. And of course, when we talk about personality, you know we're referring to those traits that make us who we are. Those traits that characterize who we are and make us different from everybody else. The frontal lobe is responsible for that. It's also responsible for selective attention. So for instance, now you're able to look at this video and focus on me, even though there are other things vying for your attention. And one other thing that is not noted here is that the frontal lobe plays a key role in motivation. You know, when we speak about motivation, we're referring to that drive that propels you to work towards a certain goal or to work towards your achievements. So the frontal lobe is responsible for that aspect of your life where you are motivated to work towards certain goals. All right, great. Now we're going to move on to the temporal lobe, and the temporal lobe is going to be located slightly behind our ears. So the primary function of the temporal lobe is auditory processing, meaning that the temporal lobe helps us with hearing sounds, but not just hearing sounds, helping us to assign meaning to those sounds and also to remember sounds that we have heard previously. So for instance, if you hear a siren, right, the temporal lobe would be responsible for helping you to hear the sound in the first place, but also to assign meaning to it. So you might say, okay, this is either the ambulance or the fire truck or the police vehicle for that matter. And it also helps you to remember songs that you have heard in the past. Okay? The temporal lobe is also responsible for visual memory. So let's say you visited a place, a location, 5 years ago. The temporal lobe will be responsible for helping you to remember that location, and it also helps you to remember faces. So that is why you're able to see somebody that you've seen before and recognize their face. And it also helps you to interpret body language, to look at a person's body language and interpret what they mean. And very importantly, the temporal lobe helps to transfer short-term memory, or to convert short-term memory into long-term memory. This lobe also plays a role in language development, helping us to understand and to make sense of language. And the area in the temporal lobe responsible for that is known as Wernicke's area. And finally, this lobe is the area that controls all of our emotions. I know typically when we speak about emotions, we think that these emotions are controlled by the heart. However, the brain is what really controls our emotions. So happiness, sadness, all of these emotions are controlled by the temporal lobe. All right, great. Let's move on to the occipital lobe. And of course, that's the area in purple, and that would be at the back of the head. So the occipital lobe's primary responsibility is visual perception. And not only are we able to physically see images, but we're also able to make meaning, to derive meaning from the images, to determine what it is, to determine what an item is, and also to determine the characteristics, to identify the characteristics of an object. It is also responsible for recognizing colors, so your ability to differentiate among colors, blue, green, red, yellow, is a function of the occipital lobe. It also helps us in assessing distance. So for instance, those of you that drive, let's say you're backing out of your driveway, the occipital lobe will be responsible for helping you to assess how far your car is from the driveway, if you should back up some more, if you should go forward, those type of things. And finally, the occipital lobe plays a key role in reading and even copying information. So if you were copying this information from the board into a notebook, the occipital lobe would be responsible for helping you to do that. And our final lobe, that area in pink, is called the parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe is the primary sensory area of the brain, meaning that this lobe is the one that translates all sensation. So for instance, if I were to take a needle and prick my finger, the fact that I would feel that pain in my finger and not in my toes, for instance, is a function of the parietal lobe. And it also helps us to differentiate different types of touch. For instance, if you touch something hard versus something soft, the temporal lobe will be responsible for that and helping you also to detect changes in temperature. All right, it's also responsible for navigation. So those of you who are good at following directions or reading maps, this lobe plays a key role in that regard. Okay, so let's talk about proprioception. Now, proprioception refers to your ability to understand where your body is in space in relation to itself. So as an example, if I were to say to you, take your finger and touch your nose. Instinctively, you're going to do that. You don't need to look in a mirror to see where your nose is because you know where your nose is located on your body. So that is proprioception. All right, and finally, this lobe is responsible for helping you to remember the shape, location, and size of objects without visualizing them, without a visual stimuli. So for instance, if I were to ask you to close your eyes and try to navigate around your house for 15 minutes, you may stumble a little, but you'll find your way around because you're going to remember where items are in your house. You're going to remember where your living room is, where's your dining room, where's the kitchen. So this lobe of the brain helps you to remember where those objects are placed, even if you're not able to see them. So there you have it. We've briefly gone over the functions of the 4 lobes of the cerebrum. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.